Hello, hello, and hello. My name is John Humphreys. This is ATA's live stream that we bring to you Mondays and Thursdays at 8:30. I do not have my sidekick. Brian is off duty again tonight, so you're stuck with me. But that's a perfect opportunity for me to do a one of the nerdy deep dive that I had promised slash was pressured into doing at the last live stream. And people said that some people might want to understand what is hidden in the budget as we prepare for the next budget. But anyway, the introductory stuff, this is live. You'll see the mistakes as they happen. You've probably already seen one. This is simulcast to YouTube, Facebook, and X, both on the ATA's platform, that's the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, and my own personal platform, that's John Humphreys. So you see the name down the bottom there somewhere, John Humphreys, Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Put those into Facebook, X, and YouTube, please, and go and find us on each of those platforms and give us a follow. That part is free, so please do that. It helps us to get out there. Also, on this right now, the people watching, please give it a like, please give it a share, get it out there. And of course, if you're following along, you can comment, and as you do, I'll be able to see you and we can have a chat and back and forth. If you've got questions as we go, if you've got disagreements, if you've got questions on anything really, but we're going to be talking about the budget mostly, or just snarky comments, or you want to comment on my haircut or anything like that, go ahead. So that's the most of the formalities. Of course, one last little one that I always sneak in there, that's the website for ATA, Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au. Go there, check out what we're doing, check out the campaigns, follow along if you can. If you're interested, maybe sign a petition or get involved in one of the campaigns. And if you've got the spare pesos, consider becoming a member. But that's out of the way. Now, this is a dangerous thing to say, isn't it? This will be a shorter live stream. Inshallah, if Allah inches, it will be inched. I'm going to aim to make it a shorter live stream. We'll see. If there's lots of good comments, maybe I'll stick around. But it's just me monologuing, and I'll run out of voice on my own. But last time we spoke, Brian was peppering me with questions, and a few other people were as well, about some of the details of how the budget worked. I mentioned off the cuff that some budget spending is done off budget and hidden, and people were curious about that. So I thought, well, I promised I'd come back and talk about that, but then I thought the budget's out tomorrow, right? The federal budget comes out. It's normally on the second Tuesday of every May, so it's got a pretty normal routine, but they've put this one early because there's a federal election coming up. And so I thought, since that's coming out tomorrow, people will be paying attention. For the boffins out there, the curious out there, may want to understand this a little better than you have before. Let's do a little run through. I mean, my first real job coming out of university was working in the budget area of the Federal Treasury down in Canberra for my sins. So it sort of stuck with me. I been keeping an eye on budgets ever since. And maybe for the curious out there, it would be interesting to get to know how they work a little bit. And I can point to a few of the tricks and a few of the paces. If you want to follow along when the budget comes out, I can't see tomorrow's budget yet, so we'll be looking at last year's budget. We'll run through last year's budget. But when it comes out tomorrow, it'll be structured roughly the same way. You can work out what it is you want to see, and now you'll know how to go and find the information you want to find. If you don't trust the commentary coming from the talking heads on TV, which is fair enough. Before we do that, though, I thought there'd be just a couple of things to run through non-budget related fairly quickly while we wait for people to mosey into the room. So keep liking and sharing. One is I saw a comment on X, which I thought was worth sharing and discussing just a little bit. It was a comment along the lines of people were talking about inflation. Right, so a bit of a segue from the budget, but people were talking about inflation. And I've heard this before. You might have heard this one before, where people suggest that inflation is caused by greedy capitalists or greedy corporations or corporations that are heartless. You know, they're being cruel and they're just increasing the prices because they can. Now, there's some superficial truth to that. Businesses do increase the prices when they can. They enjoy making money. But the idea of that as an explanation for inflation is an odd one, because if you think inflation is caused by corporations getting more greedy, the logic flip side of that is that when inflation goes down, that must be because corporations are getting less greedy. And the inflation cycle going up and down is being caused by corporations getting more greedy, then less greedy, then more greedy, then I mean, it's a pretty absurd comment anyway. So this comment showed up, and I thought this was from a guy calling himself Purple Pingers, who I believe is running for the Senate for the Victorian Socialists at the upcoming federal election. And as you be able to guess from either the person's name or the party they're representing, that they are more on the left side of politics, or on the radical left, or as a revolutionary communist. Or I don't know what brand, anarcho-syndicalist, or I don't know what brand he is, but he's some sort of radical leftist. But he's given a version of this. Inflation is caused by corporate price gouging, because up until a few years ago, there was basically no corporate price gouging, according to Mr. Pingers here. Right? We had near zero inflation. Inflation was considered too low by some people, so corporates were just anti-price gouging. It was a disgraceful situation of anti-price gouging by the corporates. And then, they price gouged the correct amount, according to Mr. Pingers, and now they got carried away, and now they're price gouging too much. But, recently, in the last 6 months, inflation's come down, which means, the corporates are price gouging less over the last 6 to 12 months. Very nice of them, very gentlemanly. And if we can just get them to price gouge a little bit less, we can get inflation back in that magic 2 to 3% bracket. Just saying it aloud, I think, makes it very clear that it's a very unlikely thesis. And I said as much to him here, which is basically just a repeat of what I was saying to you guys. But do we honestly believe that corporate greed has been fluctuating up and down in line with inflation, which I don't think anyone actually thinks that, but I'm not sure if Mr. Pingers and his friends have thought too deeply about economics writ large, or this particular question of economics in particular. Anyway, I found that amusing and a little opportunity to be able to have another rant about inflation. Although, look, I will take this opportunity to now also be unpopular, because I enjoy that. Because got to say something dangerous. This is about the inflation. They need to devalue the debt. Very true. They also, the other big upside to inflation is they get a hell of a lot of bracket creep, sends income tax revenue through the roof, which we have seen over the last couple of years. Yes. No, I had heard about him floating around, and I heard that one before. But this is always an issue of perspective, right? Where you're standing. If you are a revolutionary communist, then the Greens seem far too moderate. But it's an absurd thing to say objectively, but it makes sense from where he's standing on the political spectrum. But I don't think he's really hiding the ball. He's not running for the Victorian Fabian Social Democrats. He's running for the Victorian Socialists. So kudos to him in saying that. But anyway, ripping on Mr. Pingers and his daft understanding of economics notwithstanding, I'm going to say something that's out of step with the current political zeitgeist, but I think it's true. So I want to get it on record now, and then I'll duck my head down and you can all ignore me if you like. But I don't think the major cause of the inflation we've had in recent years has been the government spending either. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the government spending was a mistake. I'm not defending the idea of the government running deficits or the idea of the government spending as much as it does. I think government spending should be drastically cut back, and we should be running balanced budgets and big tax cuts. That's my preferred political solution. But my preferred political solution doesn't change my understanding of how the laws of economics work. And my understanding of the laws of economics, which I think is accurate. There's plenty enough research done in this area of open economy macroeconomics, which I think is the relevant area, which I think backs me up. But I'll just outline it briefly. And that is the main driver of inflation is too much money chasing not enough goods. That's easy enough to establish, I think. But the main cause of that too much money chasing not enough goods is basically the Reserve Bank. But it's the creators of money, which isn't only the Reserve Bank. Those people who have a nuanced understanding of banking would know that actually banks can create credit, which is fungible to money, which is a long way of saying banks basically create money. Asterisks, see the details later, but don't worry too much about the details for now. It's banks and Reserve Bank, and especially the Reserve Bank, they can set the interest rates, and that determines how much money is flowing into the economy. They set the interest rates too low, they flow too much money into the economy. Too much money chases not enough goods. You end up with your problem. Now, the standard political narrative at the moment, I understand why it's very popular politically, is that the government has spent too much money and that's created inflation. I think there's some truth to that. But that's like, I think it's overwhelmingly the RBA that's doing it, and the government's just taking the situation and making it a bit worse. And so I think we need to be a little careful allocating all the blame in one place because it's convenient for a political narrative now. Because in the future, we may need to get people specifically focused on a problem and having them understand the truth of that situation. And it might be harder to get that truth across if we've sold everyone on the idea that inflation is always just caused by either, I don't know whether the narrative is government spending or government deficits. That's not necessarily true. I mean, I think government deficits, firstly, you can have government spending just matched with taxes, and then you wouldn't have a deficit. So that's a different issue itself. If you increase spending but increase tax, you aren't actually putting any more money in the economy by the government. You're just changing who gets it. So that's not really inflationary in any model. And then there's the idea that government spending without increased taxes, therefore you run a deficit. That puts money in the economy. The problem with that theory, in my opinion, is that Australia is a small open economy, and we borrow half our money from overseas. And money that you borrow from overseas doesn't end up being inflationary because it gets a little messy with the open economy macroeconomics. You have to create new money for inflation to be caused, right? And the RBA can create new money. And if the government's money that they spend, they're borrowing it, right? So if they just borrow it from someone else, that other person now can't spend it. So yeah, the government spent $10 more, but they borrowed it from someone who couldn't spend $10 more. Now, if the government borrows domestically, their borrowing can lead to the creation of new money, right? So there is some truth in the story. But Australia, 50% of our borrowings come from overseas. And people outside Australia, they can't print Australian dollars. International banks can't create Australian dollars. Foreigners can't do that. So that's why I think that the main reason not to have budget deficits is that they just don't work. If the idea is to pump prime the economy, they don't work because the main consequence of running a deficit is we borrow that money from overseas. You borrow that money from overseas, that money was literally going to be used to otherwise invest in an Australian business or buy Australian exports. There's only a fixed number of things you can do with Australian dollars overseas. No other country accepts Australian dollars to buy your Weet-Bix, right? Or to fill up your car with petrol in any other country. If you have Australian dollars outside of Australia, the only things you can really do with it are buy Australian goods, that's our exports, good, or invest in Australian business. So it's either inbound foreign investment or it's buying our exports. And the main consequence then of the government running a deficit, I don't believe the main consequence of that is inflation. I think the main consequence of that is hurting our export industry, which is another reason not to do it. I'm not arguing they should spend more money and run deficits, but I think we need to correctly identify the perpetrator of the mistake and what they're doing wrong and what the cause is, what the consequence is from that. So deficits don't work to boost the economy, but they hurt our export industry. And RBA setting the interest rates too low, that overwhelmingly is the cause of inflation, in my opinion. Anyway, so it doesn't fit that convenient. Let's blame Albo for it. We can blame Albo for lots, and I think he's still making a mistake. But I do think it's worthwhile us having a nuanced explanation, at least somewhere in the background on this issue. So just checking the messages. Money is always just backed by people's willingness to accept the money, ultimately, at the end of the day. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Our money is basically backed by nothing. Our money is backed by the fact that the government puts you in jail if you don't pay tax. And they require the tax to be paid in Australian dollars. So at the end of the day, if we have a tax system, and we have the government enforcing the tax system, and they require that tax to be paid in Australian dollars, there will always be demand for Australian dollars, because when you go to pay your tax, you'll need to, even if you're doing all of the rest of your even if you're buying all of your groceries in Bitcoin or gold or seashells or whatever it is you're using as your day-to-day currency, at the end of the year, if you pay tax, you'll have to buy Australian dollars to be able to pay tax. That creates demand for the Australian dollar. So the Australian dollar is a tax-backed currency for all intents and purposes. And all money is kind of magic. I mean, some of the earliest money was seashells. That just seems like magic. I mean, cigarettes. I mean, any commodity could be money. Cigarettes have been several times in the past. I mean, in jail, everyone kind of has seen those stories, but also in POW camps. There was a fascinating story, segue upon segue here. This is why I like the chats, right? So let's get distracted. During the Second World War, there was a British guy who was captured by the Germans and was sent to a POW camp. He happened to be an economist who was quite astute, had a good understanding of monetary economics. And while he was in the POW camp, he noticed that it was a cigarette-backed currency. The cigarettes were the currency, right? So it was a cigarette currency being used inside the POW camps, and he tracked it as the Red Cross or whoever came in and brought cigarettes, because the good old days, right, when they're bringing the essentials you need for prisoners to survive. One of the essentials is cigarettes, very different to the world we live in today. But when they brought in extra cigarettes into the camp, suddenly the price of everything, in this totally informal, like no one decided to put the price up, but it's fully decentralized, unregulated, because it's an illegal black market under the nose of the Germans. So this POW black market, the price of everything went up when there were more cigarettes to buy. So more money chasing fewer goods, or more money chasing the same amount of goods, or too much money chasing not enough goods, however you want to describe it. It exactly happened. More cigarettes were chasing things. If the Red Cross didn't show up one time, which I believe he documented one of the months they didn't show up, suddenly everything started getting, much cheaper, right? The value of the cigarettes started going up. So you actually had deflation in the price of things, because there were fewer cigarettes left to buy things, less money chasing the same amount of goods, lower prices. Right. So this is just an interesting little quirk of history, just reinforcing the idea of what causes inflation. But also it kind of shows anything can be money. So it all kind of seems like magic, I think, at the end of the day. If seashells can become money, or what made cigarettes become money? Nothing really, just the fact that they were taken to be reliable mediums of exchanges, store of value, and unit of account. So I guess not everything can be money, because bananas would make terrible money, because the bananas would go off too quickly. But that's theoretically anything could be money. Yeah, well, government-backed money is always backed by the fact that they'll put you in jail if you don't pay tax, right? So it's a tax-backed economy. But I mean, you can ask similar questions. What's Bitcoin backed by? And I don't mean that as a rip on Bitcoin. I mean, I'm saying you can ask kind of similar questions on everything. At the end of the day, at least back when I started saying this line, Bitcoin was kind of a cocaine-backed currency. Because if all else fails, what can you do? So if everyone stops accepting the Australian dollar, if all else fails, you can pay your tax in Australian dollars. Right? If all else fails, you can always go onto the dark web and buy your cocaine with Bitcoin. So there's a fallback use for it. You can kind of ask the same question with everything, though. I mean, what's gold backed by? Seems like a funny question. It's backed by gold. But what if everyone decided they didn't care about gold? Well, then you have to ask, well, what is the underlying use going on with the product that you're wanting to use? Why does it have underlying value? And I found it quite worrying to realize that the majority use of retail gold in the world's economy today was Indians renting it to each other to wear at weddings. So that's that gave me a moment's pause about gold. I still quite like the idea of gold as an investment, but there's always the underlying question of what is it backed by? What is the underlying reason why anyone would want it if it wasn't a currency? Is the question there. I always thought silver was a better option. So to the degree that I stockpile and prep for the coming Armageddon, I've got more silver than gold. But do not take financial advice from me. This is not financial advice. Do your own thing. I don't know what I'm talking about. So, yeah. Well, the questions for you then, Tim. That could well be good advice, but what's it backed by? Oh, here we go. We've got the crypto civil war going on in the chat. Look, you don't come here to get my crypto advice, and I've got no particularly great. Yes, Tyrant, silver. Because silver is backed by something that we're going to consistently use. I mean, it's needed in the production of nearly everything that we're going to need for a modern society. So there's always going to be demand for silver. It is useful, and I believe it has been artificially undervalued vis-a-vis gold for a while. So I think it's underlying. It's what it's backed by is more real than anything else. But anyway, again, don't take my advice. This is not financial advice. Do your own thing. On the crypto thing, I think there's, or maybe I should do a whole other one about that. Look, I'm 20 minutes in. I haven't even got to the budget yet. So look, I think there's a lot of value in crypto. I just don't know if we've got the right algorithm yet. Whoever works out that correct algorithm, I think will be a very rich person, and the world will be better for them. So they deserve to become the world's first trillionaire, and they may well become the world's first trillionaire. But I'm not sure if we've yet worked out that algorithm. Silver coins are pretty. Yeah, as I was saying before, gold is used in some stuff. It's just silver is used in a lot more. And if you look at the retail use of gold and silver, as in the uses other than taking it as an investment product, there is some eye-poppingly large percentage of the retail use of gold is Indians renting it to other Indians to wear at weddings, which I hope Indians keep getting married then. I mean, if that's what your commodity is backed by, if that's the fundamental underlying value that gives it investment value, and maybe I've been led astray with that, but I believe silver has more obvious retail uses or more realistic ongoing retail. Anyway, we're getting way distracted into a very different thing. That was my quick pitch on inflation and why I think Mr. Pingers is wrong, but why I think a lot of the people throwing the accusation at Albanese are only half right. I think they're also half wrong. I think the main culprit is the RBA, kept interest rates too low for too long, didn't increase them quickly enough when they did. Hopefully they've got it solved now if they can hold their nerve and not be tricked into lowering rates again, but we shall see. Maybe they should have kept it a bit higher. We'll be able to tell in the next 6 months rolls through. But I will move off inflation now. So the other quick thing I wanted to mention, look, I've got this graph here, but it'll be too annoying to bring it up. But you guys, if you came along last time, you would have seen the graph I did of the EMTRs. Look, maybe I'll try and work that out. Share screen. There we go. This was the graph I showed you last time, the effective marginal tax rates for a family of 4. I showed it as this nightmarish mishmash. Since then, I've got to do a shout out to David Plunkett, who this is the fun of X. You find some whack jobs and some very annoying people on there, but you also find some very insightful and thought-provoking people. He pointed out a couple of areas where some of these lines might have been a bit off. And it turned out he had some good insights. So I've gone back to the drawing board. Now, that's an ugly enough chart. I think it's fair to say. This is what... Where do I go to this? Right. Well, I have to take this one down to be able to show the next one. But if you remember that, it's slightly different. This is what I've got now with the help of my... Well, I say friend. I don't know if I know him. But my newfound online friend, David Plunkett. There. So you'll see it still looks like a dog's breakfast. It's still up and down like a frog on meth. You've still got a whole series of points with EMTRs, effective marginal tax rate over 100%. You've still got all the poverty traps, but the squiggles are in a slightly different place. So if I didn't get it quite right, if people are still basing their insights on the last one, I thought I should put the new one up as to admit when I make mistakes and make sure you guys can learn along as I learn along. So I still think that tells roughly the same story of eye-wateringly high EMTRs and poverty traps catching people in low incomes, making it very hard to get ahead. But I made an error, so worthwhile correcting the record. I get rid of that one. And now let's get to the meat of it. Yeah, thanks, Tyrant. Yeah, screw you. Everything will be valuable for as long as people want it. I mean, the underlying value of everything is the fact that someone wants it. I mean, who is it who wrote Menger in here? There you go. Yeah, Carl Menger moment. The underlying value of everything is the fact that somebody wants it. If no one wants it, then its value drops. I've really kicked off the monetary conversation. Maybe I should do a whole monetary session. I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with the chats. Anyway, I'm going to do the budget one anyway, because I promised I would. And for that, I need to share the budget screen. Now, this is what it currently looks like. If you go to budget.gov.au, you'll find the screen right there, not showing you the budget paper, so you can't see anything. They are shocking indeed. I know it's not pretty, but if you haven't checked it, you can go back and have a look at the last couple of live streams we've done where we dived into it a little bit and gave a few suggestions, and I'll have a few more going forward. But on that last one, I was also strong-armed into saying something about the budget, so I'm going to do that now. Now, if you're curious, I was going to run through it a little bit, point to where a few of the bodies are buried, and where you can find a few things if you're following along at home. So firstly, you can't see anything at the moment. Tomorrow you'll be able to, but we're going to just look at the last budget down the bottom, past budgets. 24, 25. And this is what you get. It'll always look slightly different depending on which graphic designer they've hired. But the core is there's four main budget papers. And for the most part, you just want budget paper 1. So budget paper 1, that's basically the budget. All right, you do just to skip forward. Budget paper 2 just outlines each individual measure. So sometimes that's useful if you want a bit more detail about something the government's announced. You can dive into budget paper 2. Budget paper 3 is how much the feds are giving the states in GST. And budget 4 is outlining the money for each agency and department. But budget paper 1 is where the main heart of the budget is. And then going through that, it's split into budget statements, which are kind of like chapters. Budget statement. So the first chapter is just what the government wants you to hear, so you can skip that one. The second statement is telling you about the Treasury's latest guess about the economy. We kind of already know their guess about the economy, and the government doesn't control that. At least it has no short-term control over that. So that's just modeling. That's got no more importance than anyone else's guess about the economic future. Now, from statement 3, it starts to get relevant. So statement 3 there, fiscal outline. So if we go into that, it'll show you what they expect the budget to be. So let's do that. Sorry a second. Can you see this along with me? Just checking the messages occasionally. All right. So you can read it all if you like. There's someone at Treasury is a perfectly adequate writer most of the time. I mean, it changes who it is, obviously year to year, but that's fine. But I normally just jump straight to the charts because nearly most of what the text is just talking to the charts, right? Or giving the government spin or narrative about how they want you to interpret the charts. So if you go to the charts first, do your own interpretation, you can then go back and check what the interpretation the government wanted you to have. And that's nice. So here you go. This would be, for instance, now I didn't actually check all of these. It's just expecting things to be roughly where they used to be. But so far they are. So let me see if I can make this a bit bigger. How does that work for you? Yeah, that is better. So table 3.1, here we go, underlying cash balance. And that's the thing that most of the media will report. I mean, that's the take home for what the government will normally talk about. They'll normally talk about the underlying cash balance. That's what you call a budget balance. Be aware there are like 5 different budget balances. I mean, you could probably come up with a lot of them, but there's but anyway, this is the main one, the underlying cash balance. And you'll see here the current year that they were. So this was released in last year. So the budget year is the year that is coming. So this is one trick. This is the first trick you'll see. I think I mentioned this one last time. So the budget being released tomorrow is the 25-26 budget, right? 25-26. So that's the one that should be highlighted. That's what will matter for the coming budget. For this one, for the last year's budget, 2024 budget, this is the number that mattered. But interestingly, the government really wanted to talk about that number. So you can see the previous year, they'd run a small surplus. And the year before that, they'd run a decent sized surplus. And that's all they wanted to talk about. So the first thing to note is, which is the budget year? For 24, the budget year is 24-25. For 25 this year, the budget year is 25-26, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the underlying cash balance, and this top number is in billions, and the number underneath it is percent of GDP. Most people talk, it's good to know, percentage of GDP is a good way to give you an indicator for how big these numbers are. But if you're talking budget with other people, they'll be talking about the budget in billions. That's the other thing to note. When you're talking federal government, everything's in billions. So if someone comes to you and they says they have a saving measure or a tax measure, and it'll impact the budget by 3 million, in your mind, you should think to yourself, 3 million. It sounds like a lot of money to me, but it's actually 0.003 billion, right? To be able to do proper comparisons with everything else going on. This moves 10 billion, this moves 5 billion, this moves 2 billion, this moves 20 billion. And then someone says, I've got something that moves at 0.003 billion. I'm not sure you're in the right meeting, me, buddy. This is why it kind of does matter to understand the scale of these things. So we're talking in billions, and we're talking 28.3 billion expected deficit at the time. Now the MyEFO, the mini budget, came out and I think adjusted this down to 26. But anyway, we're talking about where to find this. So this is in budget. So how do you get this? Well, your receipts, that's how much money you've got in, and your payments, and then the difference, effectively speaking. Right, and these are different measures that we don't need to worry about for the moment. So that is the cash balance. The receipts, they call the money coming in receipts, and they call the money going out payments. That's the language they use for cash. Notice here, I'm talking cash because that's going to be relevant in a second. So let's see what they've got going forward. And they're just telling us what they expect in the future. All right. So the meat of this is going to come in future chapters where we get to tap in. So I'll go to those future chapters. Chapter 4 is the Treasury having a think piece. It's nice. They can think. They want to show us how they can think. I don't normally read it. Now, 5 and 6 is the meat. 5, revenue, the money coming in. 6, expenses, the money going out. All right. So let's have a look here. Just check back, make sure you guys are still with me. Oh, this is true. Yeah, we've hit the smokers' laughers curve where they've taxed and regulated smoking and vaping so much that they're just not raising any money. Yes, I remember many years ago when I was even more of a smartass than I am today. We held a little event in a bunch of friends held an event in the middle of Brisbane CBD, saying thank you for smoking. I think it was some people were handing out cigarettes. So we had big signs saying, thank you for smoking. You're fixing the budget. You paid more tax than you'll ever use in marginal government spending, which is true, by the way. That was even true 10, 15 years ago. So probably less true now, given they don't pay tax because they're all buying Chop Chop. So yeah, I'm good. I'm just hungry, but it's okay. I'll eat afterwards. It's not about me. All right, revenue. So this is where we can find some. Now, this is some of the details they'll have. Look, I'm just going to go straight to the page that matters. You just keep scrolling down until you find the big funky chart. Oh, this one actually, this can be useful. So this is the reconciliation, right? So when they're doing the reconciliation, it's what's changed since the last budget. So the last time they had a budget, in this case, it would be the 2023 budget, they thought they were going to get $671 billion revenue. Now they think they're going to get $698 billion. You'll notice that's a much bigger number. That's a lot. That's that $27 billion in extra revenue. And you might ask, well, how did that come about? Well, they give you just two answers, right? One answer is, did the government make a decision to screw up the budget? And the other answer is, did something happen outside of their control? So a decision they made is effective policy decisions, and stuff outside their control is parameters and other variations. And you can look at those in two sections. This is like the first half of the year and the second half of the year. So you can see mostly what happened here is they just got hit with massive parameter variations. So that the mining prices, and it'll be bracket creep and things like that were out of their control. But they did have 2.2 billion. So it's with that. So it's a 2.5 billion in that year of spending decisions to increase tax. So a couple of small tax increases, as you'd expect. But yeah, so the reconciliation is useful on that front. Another reconciliation. But I'll get to the one that is really interesting eventually. Aha. Wait, is that another reconciliation? Oh, it could be, but it doesn't matter. Okay, I'll do the next one then. Now, this shows the all of the different tax types. So if you're ever curious about where the tax comes from, who's actually paying the most of the tax, what sort of taxes are paying for most of the tax. Now, we have about 100 taxes in Australia, but a bunch of them are state taxes and a bunch of them are too small to make the budget. So this just splits it up into all the main taxes. You can see here again, shading for the budget year, and we can look how it's going to change into the future. And it's split into a few different categories, but the first one is all the different sorts of income taxes, which includes just individual income tax, fringe benefits tax reported separately, company tax, super tax, and petroleum resource rent tax. But I mean, the main one here is company tax and individual tax. And the individual tax is PAYG, the withholding tax, and this gross other individuals would be your contractors who don't pay withholding tax normally. They'll sort out their own tax because they work for themselves. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so you can see your income tax is normally understood, bringing in $327 billion odd dollars, which is a very large chunk of our income tax. You add in your company tax and your super, you got close to $500 billion. Right? You're 492. But look, by the current budget year, the year we're currently in, almost certainly it's going to be income tax over $500 billion. Well, there you go. There's a headline right there. I mean, people like nice round numbers. Income tax in Australia now over $500 billion a year and climbing very quickly. Look at that rate of increase. The so from 500 up to 573 basically in a couple of years. So kind of eye-watering. No, Tyrant. I don't know if you're doing the meme. I can't tell. But 27 billion would be 1,000 each for 27 million people, because a billion is 1,000 million, not a million. Although if you're doing the meme, then I just beclowned myself by giving a direct answer to a meme comment. But I'm going to pretend you were serious so I get to not look stupid in calling you out for making the mistake. But then you get to look stupid instead. So it had to be one of us, Tyrant. It had to be one of us, and you don't have a microphone. So I'm going to assume you're the one making a mistake. Okay. All right. Fine. Other people might believe you though. So that's what I'll hide behind. But anyway, this big chunk of tax, this is the income tax. Then what other taxes are there? Well, there you go. There's GST. Now that's a little bit tricky. Federal government doesn't keep GST. I mean, they bundle it up in a really weird way and hand it out to the states in exactly the way that'll screw over the states, undermine productivity, and ruin the country. But putting aside how they divvy up the GST, they don't keep it. So this is where you can go to find out how much the GST is, but the federal government doesn't keep that money. So it's a bit of a moot point. The absurd wine equalization tax and luxury car tax, you should get rid of all of this shit. And then you got your excise duties, right? So there's your petrol tax, there's your diesel tax, and your tobacco. That's what they expected. It'll be really interesting to see what that comes in. So keep an eye on that. If you want to know, this is where you go. So what is this? Table 5.7, budget paper 1, budget statement 5. That's the revenue statement. That halfway through, you see this this chart that's about a page long. You can just keep scrolling till you hit the page long charts. And under excise, tobacco, that'll be the one to keep an eye on. So they were already saying they thought it would go down. I think it might be going down a bit quicker than that. There you go. This is the first one they should abolish. But I'm biased. Well, actually, no, maybe this one. Oh, let's start a flame war in the chat now. Should we abolish beer excise or spirits excise first? But anyway, that's where you get all of your excise and customs. And your other little mini taxes at the end. So that's basically it. It's mostly income tax. Now you've got some non-tax revenue, sales of goods and services, interest received. But anyway, that's how you get to your total revenue. You see, if your total revenue is 700 billion odd, and your income tax is 500, and you have to give a big chunk of that, the GST away, income tax really does drive our tax system. Let's see what's going on in here. Well, it's not in there yet. We'll see. We'll see what they come up with, and we'll see how they frame it yet. I don't think they'll do it, but we'll complain when they do. They want you to stop driving. I mean, the old argument was that the demand for petrol was fairly inelastic, so you could tax it and people would keep driving, and you'd be able to raise a bit of money, in a way other than income tax. But that kind of worked as a rationale when we had state fuel taxes. About 30 years ago, they got rid of state fuel taxes, introduced the federal fuel tax, and since then, the tax has just been going up and up and up and up. And now they're starting to use the rationalization that, petrol is bad. And so if they tax you enough, they'll stop. But anyway, vapes aren't taxed. Vapes are either illegal, like what I've got here. This is, it's either illegal or it's prescription. So if it's illegal, you're not paying tax. If it's prescription, it's a medicine and you're not paying tax. Now, what we've argued for a while, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, and if you agree with us, become a member, taxpayers.org.au. We've argued for a while that it should just be treated the same way as cigarettes. They are 95% less harmful than cigarettes. Give you the similar sort of hit with far less of the unhealthy stuff. So they should be treated at least the same, if not better. Right? At least the same, if not better. Instead, they're treated worse, which is an absurdity of our current system. And if you treated them as a product like cigarettes, then you'd be able to tax them. if they're a prescription drug, you can't tax them. So vapes, they get nothing from. If they did introduce a reasonable excise on vapes that didn't get carried away, they could raise like a billion or so, maybe a bit more a year. You know, if they put on a really harsh excise, they could raise more, but I hope they don't do that. But yes, that's probably one of the few places where introducing a new tax would actually increase the amount of liberty in the country. Taking us from a banned product to a taxed product is a step forward, and kind of weird to see a libertarian arguing for a tax, but it'd probably be a tax is better than a prohibition. How's that? Anyway, so we've gone through that paper. Let me just quickly take you to the expenses one. Statement 6, like chapter 6 of the document that matters, expenses. Click on the PDF, and there's a few things here that are interesting to look at. Again, I normally skip their words. If you want, you can just look at the total expenses. We got that from the fiscal page. And the reconciliation. All right, here's a good one. Effective policy decisions. So how much is the government increasing spending each budget, each year? So you can see from the last budget to the mini budget, like halfway through the year, they spent an additional 2.6 in that year. And then between the last mini budget and this budget, effective policy decisions, again, they spent another 12 billion on that year. So you see, it really starts to add up. And then you got the things that are outside of their control, but those are outside of their control, so I don't blame them as much. But when you get the idea that these are tax and spend budgets, this is one of the places I'll go to, either budget statement 3 or then 5 and 6, and look at this. Are the changes caused by policy decisions or things outside of their control? And you can see here, often this, what's this, 24, this is adding these 4 up, right? $25 billion of new spending decisions in the previous, 6 months before that budget. I mean, if you're spending $25 billion every 6 months, that's 25 billion here, 25 billion there. Soon it's going to add up to real money. You can see why there's been the accusation they've been a bit spendthrift, although it hasn't blown a massive hole in the budget because they just keep getting smacked in the ass with sunshine in terms of this bracket creep, this $10 billion, $5 billion, whatever it is each year tax increase, this hidden tax increase that we get slugged with, which allows governments to be ridiculously spendthrift and irresponsible and partly get away with it, although they're still putting us into the deficit, as we've seen. So anyway, that's one, the reconciliation, always a good one. But here we go. So this is spending by function. So there's total government spending, 735 billion odd. Now, a lot of people agree with me when I say we're spending too much, but this is when it gets interesting, right? When I ask people, well, go and find out which parts of spending you want to cut. And I would love to slash a lot of it, but a lot of it gets quite sensitive. So this is a good place to go to actually find out where the money is going. Where is your money going? Table 6.3, and then it disaggregates on the following pages as we go forward. So firstly, this other purposes, a big chunk of that is just handing the GST back to the states. So it looks like a nice one to cut. You can't really, unless you're reforming the way GST works, which we should, but let's put that aside for now. That's not really spending. That's just passing money on between levels of government. And then you've got by far the biggest, SS&W, Social Security and Welfare, just welfare, broadly speaking. And by far the second biggest, if you don't count GST, is health. So health and welfare. And then after that, you've got education and defense. Right? And then those are really the big ones. So then you can split them up, divvy them up, and have a look a bit more detail inside. This shows you the biggest programs, which is also a very useful thing to look at. So again, ignore the first one. That's just giving money to the states. So I was going to say, well, this is going to make it clear anyway. So I was going to say, anyway, when you look at the welfare number, a lot of people think, yeah, that's fine. I like cutting welfare. This is true. Defund it all. But yes, it's probably a bit outside the Overton window. I'd be happy to cut some welfare, but a lot of people look at that and go, yes, well, Social Security and welfare, we should trim that. Too many people get the dole. Most of that money is not the dole. We'll get to it in a second. Most of that is not the dole. Most of it is the age pension or the disability pension, which, try going into an election saying you're going to trim that. So let's actually have a look at what the biggest spending items are. And if you want to get the budget under control, and the budget is out of control, eventually something's going to have to be done about these biggest numbers. So let's have a look at the biggest ones. So the first one doesn't count. It's just passing on GST revenue to the states. So support for seniors, right? So Anyone here volunteering to go to the election saying we're going to cut the age pension, we're going to take money away from old people? All right. Good luck with that. The next one, the NDIS. I mean, this one's been growing. It's been moving its way up the charts. And look, you flow this forward, it's eventually going to overtake support for seniors. This is a really big one. But again, go to an election saying, vote for me. I'm going to cut money for old people and the disabled. Hi. All right. So not just the age pension, but now aged care benefits. All right. We're going to cut money for aged pensioners, the disabled, and people who are in care homes. People who are already generally hardly done by and already have a lot of sympathy, and people think they need more money. All right. Well, surely there's got to be something we can cut here. What's the next one? Medicare. All right. Good luck. All right. You go out there, go to the election saying, don't worry, vote for us. We're just going to cut spending on the age pension, on the disabled people, on people who are in homes, and Medicare. All right. The next one, hospitals. Assistance to the states for healthcare basically means the federal government is partly funding hospitals. The state governments have to partly fund hospitals as well. But that's what this line effectively means. Assistance to the states for healthcare means cross-subsidizing hospitals. All right. So you can try to cut hospitals. Next one, debt management. You haven't got much choice there. You could default. Maybe we should. People would learn a lesson and stop lending money to the government. But for the moment, if we're not defaulting, then right now we've got the actual disability pension, because the one above is NDIS. That's that disability scheme that is getting a lot of attention lately. And now we've got down here the actual disability pension. After that, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. You may have noticed all of the most expensive things here are all of the things that nearly everyone would say, look, I want to cut spending. I wouldn't cut spending on, and then they list everything that's on this list. Like all of the things that people say, well, let's not cut spending on the aged or disabled or the sensitive issues. Let's just cut spending on other issues. Well, look at what makes up nearly all of the government spending. Look at these numbers. Right by the bottom of this list, we're down to numbers under 10 billion. So we've already got through, yeah. And then non-government schools. All right, so this is like the here's a conversation. Well, about that money, I think should just be all sent down to the states. But this is the state governments fund public schools, and this is the federal government funding non-public schools, so that there's some competition between the schools. It's a very messy system, having it done across two jurisdictions. Support for families. So this is like family tax benefit. And now we've got the dole. So you see, people often think, oh yeah, look, we have to cut government spending. Too many people on the dole. It's not within QE. Right, that is not where the money is being spent. And then you got the childcare subsidy. That one is growing. That one's working its way up. As you can see, by the end of this chart, it overtakes the dole. Childcare subsidy moves its way up the list. And then carers pension, people looking after other people with a disability. All right, good luck cutting that one. And then government support for schooling. Look, both of those should just be handed over to the states. But to do that, you need to hand more money over to the states. And then you're getting down to smaller issues. But anyway, that one I think is useful for getting people to snap in to understanding the size of the problem we face. I mean, a lot of people talk about how they want to get the budget under control. I want to spend less. I want to cut waste. At some stage, we're going to have to, I don't know how we're going to do it. Maybe it's just after the economy's fallen off a cliff, but someone's going to have to come to terms with the fact that the parts of government spending that are popular are unsustainable. They are massive. They are growing faster than the rest of the economy. Like everything there that was for the aged and for medicine and disabled at the moment are all growing faster than the economy. Now, the disabled spending is probably just growing faster than the economy because everyone's rorting the system. So if we could fix the rorts, maybe we could fix that as a growth driver of government spending. But the age spending and the health spending, that's not caused by a rort. That's caused by the fact that we're getting older. That's not a rort. That's true, right? We are getting older. So nearly everything we pointed to there, except for the education ones, are growing faster than the economy. So good luck. Good luck to whoever's listening to this, wants to go into politics and do the right thing. What have we got here? All right. I don't know what we're reading. Maybe this budget. You should come on here. Jordan, if you want to give your 2 cents. Let me see. I don't know if you do. You're probably busy. But There you go. Invitation sent. I won't be able to see it for the moment because I'm going to scroll through this a little bit more. Oh no, that was basically the end of that I wanted to get to on the. You can then divvy this up. They break into it in more detail. So let's go for the SS&W, Social Security and Welfare. They don't break defense up. They never let you see the details inside defense. They split it up into all the areas. They split defense up into defense. The end. Don't look. You have no right to look. Spend the money. Go home, peasant. But it's education. They divvy that up. So we should just get rid of the university education entirely. But that's a different topic. Health spending. So you can see Medicare, pharmaceuticals, hospitals, which you already saw because those three are some of the three biggest that we've got in the country. They split that up a bit more. And here we go, SS&W. So the assistance to the aged. Second biggest, assistance to disabilities. Assistance to families. Assistance to the unemployed. All right, so maybe there's something to cut there, but to cut that, you'll have to be braver than what most politicians have been to date. So this gets me to something that I promised to speak about, but I haven't yet, which is what are the different budget balances? So let me get into this. This is going to be quite boffiny. Oh, check your Signal, Ditloff. I just sent you the link via Signal 1 minute ago. You haven't opened it. But come on in whenever you're ready. In the meantime, I'm going to bore people. I hope you're not bored. I'm going to frustrate people with running you through some of the tricks to the budget balance, because so far we've been talking about you get your receipts in from tax. That's great. We looked at that. You have all these payments out that you spend. That's great. And then you get your underlying cash balance, and that's what everyone reports. This is the cash balance. This is what the budget is, and that is one budget balance. That is one that's commonly used, but it is not the only one. And I think it is interesting to note that there are two dominant ones. I see Jordan's here, so I'll bring him in a second. But let me just say this one first. There's two dominant budget balances that are reported: the underlying cash balance, the fiscal balance. And the cash, the difference is, if you know your accrual, one's cash, one's accrual, right? So the accrual balance, the fiscal balance, tells you all of the money that you've earned this year, even if the money hasn't shown up, and all of the money that you've committed to spend this year, even if you haven't actually sent the money out yet. And the cash shows all the money you've actually come in this year, all the money that's gone out. They're very similar concepts, as you can imagine. In most instances, you say, I'll buy an apple. When you say you buy an apple, you've got it's done for accrual purposes. When you give the money, it's done for cash purposes. They often happen in the same year. So cash and accrual are similar, but they're not the same. We've used underlying cash for the federal budget since forever. The Howard government switched to accrual. They switched to reporting the fiscal balance. They did it for about 2 years. And then I think on the second or third year, they were in a situation where the fiscal balance was, actually, I'll bring Jordan in so he can hear this. This is a good story. Hey, Jordan, how you doing?
Hey, mate. Good. Hey, everyone.
So I don't know if I've told you this one before, Jordan, but you might have heard it, but you'll have to sit through it again anyway. But yeah, the Howard government brought in fiscal budgeting. I got to put the screen back so my head doesn't look as big compared to yours. Fiscal budgeting, which made perfect sense. It's probably the better way to do things in many ways. Look, they're both reasonable estimates. But and then after 2 years, they were in a situation where the fiscal balance, the one they said, oh, we're bringing it in, it's a great idea, was in deficit. But one they had just finished convincing everyone it's the wrong one. That's outdated. That's what they used in the old days. The cash balance was still in surplus. Magically, I was working at Treasury at the time, and I found this remarkable. It's a really good insight into the way politics and media works. That the government just went out that year, and without seemingly any shame, they just said, great news, the cash balance is in surplus. And one person in the media said, wait, what did you say? Like, I remember when we were putting the budget papers together, and I was thinking that they're not going to get away with this. This is too transparent. I mean, everyone's going to see.
Oh, sweet summer child, those youthful days of naivety.
Well, I don't think it's that everyone in the media was just out to give Howard an easy run. I just don't think they know. Like, I think people constantly.
It's like the big lie, right? If you just do it so brazenly and hide in plain sight, people just go, "Well, it must make sense." You know, the emperor clearly is wearing clothes.
And some of this stuff gets so complicated, and as complicated as it is, you can also be a bigger asshole if you want and make it sound even more complicated. And if you do that to a bunch of journalists with a very small amount of free time, they don't want to look like idiots. So the easiest way to safely not looking like an idiot is absolutely, let me write that down.
Yes.
And then they'll get the talking notes. Yeah, and then they get the talking notes from the other side. These are the hard questions you can ask, and then they can. But anyway, that was quite an amazing one. But one of the things I talked about on a previous live stream. Sorry, John, you stuck with when I finished this line of inquiry yet.
No, please.
Is I mentioned to people ways that the governments can put some things off budget. So I'll just give a quick reference to that in terms of cash and accrual. It comes up, right? So there's a bunch of ways the government can do something that is announceable in the budget or announceable on TV. It makes them look really good, but it doesn't hit the budget, at least not all of the budget balances. So the one that comes immediately to mind is the HECS. So John, you know this story, a 20% write-off of HECS, I think it is. They're just laughing off a bunch of the debt.
Yes.
Now, everyone talks about the underlying cash balance. That's what everyone thinks the budget balance is these days. Thank you, Howard. Would you like a guess as to how much that impacted the underlying cash balance?
How much?
Well, the fact that I'm asking almost gives it away. Zero.
Yeah.
Didn't cost the budget anything, because it cost the fiscal budget, right? So I said before, there's these two different accounts, the fiscal balance and the underlying cash balance. But you know a bit of accounting. You suffer from
what
a law
business
degree.
Is cash accounting? Very, very few these days.
Yeah, well, the government gives both of the accounts, right? So you can go and find this stuff in their accounts. It's just that the budget documents are thick and they're hard for people to read, and journalists don't have that much time. And who's really reading the budget papers? I mean, the schmucks who've been listening along with me now know a little bit about how to find and read a budget paper, but who does? Besides me, I'm a bit weird. So it's out there. They can say, look, we're not hiding the information, but it is awfully convenient that it's just not in the numbers anyone talks about. And what they've done is they've changed the value of a financial receivable, like a financial asset. So the government has a financial asset called HECS. I mean, we think of HECS as we're getting a loan. From the government's perspective, it's a financial asset. Someone owes them money.
Yes.
Right. So it's a receivable. And so that's a financial asset that's on the books. If you talk about Australia's net debt or net asset position or net wealth, one of the assets that the federal government has that's in that asset book is receivables from people with degrees, right? That's a financial asset. So you take one of your financial assets and you just sort of, times 0.8, right? 20% discount. You've decreased the financial asset. Australia is poor. Our net debt has gone up. Our net financial liabilities have gone up. Our net financial assets have gone down.
Cash balance is the same.
Cash is the same. Money didn't walk out the door, right?
Cash is king. Why do they hate cash for us, but they love cash for themselves? That's
well, interestingly, the state governments all use an accrual system, but then they don't report the fiscal balance. They stop one level before that. I was going to make people suffer through this. Maybe I still will, actually. Maybe I should ask you first. How are you doing, Jordan?
I like SR McLeod's comments. What's a budget? I feel as though that's many politicians are probably.
It's something for them to overcome, I believe, most of the time.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to think I'm not like most of my profession. How goes the campaign trail, by the way, Jordan?
Yeah, good. I sort of was left with the extension from the original 12 April date I'd planned to 10th May or 17th of May, as I felt like that was an extension of a prison sentence by a month, because I've been campaigning for like 11 months already. I was foolish enough to tell my wife that it was going to be in April. And then I had to break the news to her that, in fact, no, this terrible man, Anthony Albanese, has prolonged,
wasn't it Alfred's
widowship for a further month. It's good for the campaign, but it's
widowship. Okay.
I know you and your long-suffering wife understand that concept, but no, look, it's going really well. My campaign launch is this weekend, and I'm actually excited about the budget. We want to do a budget response because I think that the response from Peter Dutton will be very, very dog ate my homework. I do not have high hopes for detail in any shape or form, except for the vague, like, oh yeah, we'll do that too.
Well, that's not a good thing. I mean, I doubt that copying Labor's homework is going to lead you to better answers.
No,
look,
my expectations are very low. Let's put it that way.
With the hat you're wearing now, it makes perfect sense to rip shreds off them. With the hat I'm wearing, I'm going to say I am hopeful that the Liberal higher-ups hear reason and decide to embrace the ATA's tax policy proposals and tax cutting agenda, which we've been putting out over the last couple of weeks and will continue over the coming weeks. And to any Liberals who are thinking of taking on our policies, despite everything else I've said about you over the years, we do secretly love you. Please take our policies. Please steal them. And Labor too. Look, we've got a few out there that Labor could steal, although I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think, look, I think I certainly still, and I've sort of said this analogy to you before, I feel about the Liberal Party like you feel about an ex that you still care about. Like you're not together anymore, but you can see them making horrible decisions and making a mess of themselves, and you really want them to be like doing okay, but you can't get involved. So like I wish them success and health and prosperity, but I somehow have misgivings. I feel that may not be in the Magic 8 Ball, but we'll see.
Yes. Well, so that's Thursday. Have you got a time and a place for people to tune in?
So the response will be actually on Saturday. So we're going to make it part of our. I want to make it part of the campaign launch. So we're going to be having a campaign launch in Malvern, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, on Saturday in the afternoon, and hopefully I'll be joined by you and Brian and maybe someone else if I can rope them in to unpack the response to the budget as well as the budget, see what the Libertarians say. And there might be a bit of a comical, sort of humorous take to it because we're going to have Gabriel Rossi, who's a comedian, being our interviewer on the panel. So he's going to be sort of like asking us the hard but perhaps unexpected and funny questions about the budget as well.
All right, amusing comment from Mr. McLeod below. But yeah, so for context here, the name down the bottom, wherever Jordan's name is, should give it away. But Jordan's a Senate candidate for the Libertarian Party running in Victoria. So that should be a fun one. I think that that last spot in Victoria was won by Ralph Babette last election. So there is a precedent for a quote unquote minor right candidate. People don't expect to get in there in the end. So that's what Jordan's a part of that game. It'll be fun to watch. And your budget.
Yeah, Ralph got 4% and won last time, but I think I probably need 5%. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But lots of hard work's been put in, and I think in a lot of ways, 2022 people thought that was the worst or the height of the cost of COVID and of all the policy overreaction that happened then. But I think we're actually paying the sort of price for it now, and I think people are a lot more, aware of the actual consequences down the track. Like the party's over and the hangover's kicked in. So we'll see. We'll see what people think.
I hope you're right. I wish you're right. I fear that people have not connected that this massive overreaction to COVID is linked in some way to the then stagnating economy and spiraling prices. I mean, I think there's an obvious direct link between the COVID overreaction and the inflation, but I'm not sure people see it. They just say, "Damn you, government," for something to do with COVID, and then some people wipe that part of their mind, and then they go, "Damn you, government," for the prices. So I hope you're right. I hope the hard work you're doing. I've never seen anyone.
A little bit earlier this afternoon, I had a very funny interaction with Comrade Pingers, my evil Jordan counterpart from the Victorian Socialists.
We put it up. We talked about it on this live stream half an hour ago. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. I didn't join early enough to see that. But the funnier sort of postscript to that was I actually had a DM conversation with him where he was like, "Do you guys really think that like supermarket price gouging has nothing to do with inflation?" I'm like, well, if it were true that they are, extracting value from customers, which duopolies do, and I don't disagree that they have shitty business practices and they are terrible companies that need more competition, that would be something that increases prices. But that's not what we mean when we say inflation as libertarians. We're talking about a monetary phenomenon. And
this was my response to him.
Yeah, his actual response was like, "Oh, so you guys like literally are just talking about fiscal inflation." I'm like, yes, that's what we mean when we say inflation. We're not just talking about everything that increases prices or that might be a response to inflation that causes an increase in price. So it was a really funny, like it was a bizarre sort of postscript to that was that he actually understood we were having a definitional debate. And like to his credit, he was like, "Oh, okay." Like it was a very odd sort of postscript to that public spat. But anyway.
Oh, you two are going to end up besties after this campaign. I can see it.
Look,
this was my response. I've always found it odd. People think that corporate greed causes inflation. How do they explain it when inflation goes down? Does that mean corporate greed has decreased?
That's a very, very good, logical point.
At that point, they normally stop the conversation or give me a free personality assessment. I find that often leads into a free personality assessment, which is anyway. So I still wanted to run through a little bit. Sorry if I dragged you in here, but this was going to be quite a boffety session. But it is useful to have someone.
Boffing away. I'm actually really enjoying the content, and as I said, it's actually going to be helpful. It sort of saves me some manual labor homework for my.
It also is useful to me to look into the eyes of a normal person, as in not an economist, because we're not normal people, as I speak. So I can see, wait, Has that landed? Have I made no sense? Because often people will sit there and nod and smile, but their eyes will twinkle in different ways if they get it or don't. And then I can realize, oh shit, all right, stop. I need to say it a different way. So
Yeah,
as
no,
I've been
it's
using
making sense. Like, so, because I suppose I've got a little bit of business management experience as well. So I've like handled cash flow budgets and P&Ls and stuff like that. So this is obviously that on a grand scale. There's obviously some differences, but it's interesting to see. If this were a business, it would be a very, very sick business indeed, well and truly in administration, I suspect.
Oh, well, I mean, they've got a very good asset called the ability to tax people to hell anytime they want. I mean, if you had that as on your books, the ability to just take the money of everyone in your country.
Yeah, and the customers couldn't escape, right? They have to be my customer. That's awesome.
But it would make people more willing to lend to you, is my point. I mean, it does help you escape insolvency a bit longer than a business would, because a business at the end of the day can't just go and rob people when they're short of money. The government kind of has that, well, extort people, I should say. Right? It's not theft, it's extortion. Tax isn't theft, boys and girls. Tax is extortion. Slightly different things. Anyway, I'm going to put this. I have to show that. Yes, normal person, the economist says to the lawyer. All right, I'll get my lawyer jokes.
Law graduate. I'm marginally more normal than an admitted lawyer. Like, I'm not quite across that threshold where I like to lose my last vestige of humanity. Although, if I instead become a senator, that may well happen anyway.
Touche. So this is now the actual budget. So this is hidden. You've got details of this somewhere earlier in the budget. So Jordan, to get you up to speed, we're talking about budget paper 1, which is the main budget.
In
that, it's got chapters.
Yeah, I'm following along.
They call them statements. And the statements that matter go to 3 and then 5 and 6, 5 for revenue, 6 for expenses. But then down the end, statement 10 is where they have to do everything really boffiny, right? So this is all just by the books. It's just there's no narrative to go along with it. So most people don't enjoy reading it, but this is where you can actually see a bit of what's happening under the hood.
It's basically the government P&L, right? Basically.
Yeah, so this is the operating statement. They've got an operating statement, they've got a balance sheet, and then they've got a cash flow. And they've got it for 3 different versions of the government, which I might have to explain in a second. But anyway, just running this through. So this is an accrual measure then. This is the operating statement. So we're getting the accrual measure at the end of this. The fiscal balance comes out the end. Your total revenue, 710. Your total expenses, more than that. So you've got your operating balance. Now, this net operating balance is not the fiscal balance, and it's not the underlying cash balance. It's another thing. And interestingly, this net operating balance is what the state governments use. So it's very confusing, very annoying to do comparisons between state and federal governments. State governments nearly always use this net operating balance. Campbell Newman, to his credit in Queensland, for a while used the fiscal balance, which I think is the more accurate figure. But the next government unwound that. And they like to talk about the net operating balance because it's normally got a smaller deficit. So that's the reason they do it. Now, the net operating balance, well, I'll just go to the next page because some of this stuff, don't worry about this one. We can do that one another time. This is another type of balance, the operating result, but I'm not even going to talk about that at the moment. But if you skip forward, you'll see they come back and they restate the net operating balance. And then they add in the purchase of non-financial assets. So money spent on capital, basically. Money spent directly on capital owned by the government. And once they add that back in, you get to your actual fiscal balance. And that's what people talk about with a fiscal balance. So the thing to note there is this net operating balance. I can just use it here, right? Net operating balance. This top number compared to this number. That highlighting doesn't help, does it? The 23 versus the 29. Now, note that I said the state governments always use this net operating balance. They don't use the fiscal balance. They basically have run the rationale that when a state government buys capital, that capital is, I guess their internal rationale is that capital is always going to be so productive, it'll at least pay for itself, so we don't have to count that we spent money on it. Of course, the reality is when you buy that capital, you still actually have to pay for it. You have to pay for it with money that you either have through taxes or they don't because they're in a deficit. So they'll have to borrow for it. So this is contributing to more borrowing. So it is an interesting trick that the state governments used, and they can use this to hide a lot of spending off books, right? They can put out a state budget. They can say, look at all of this money we're putting into capital spending, knowing that every dollar they're announcing in capital spending is not showing up in the net operating balance, and that every journalist is going to report the net operating balance. Yep.
I have a question. So what we're looking at now is last year's budget paper, right? For the 24, 20, 25 ahead. So this column that's in blue, that's the estimates. at this budget, will we get actuals for
not for 24-25 because 24-25 hasn't finished, but they'll have an updated estimate for 24-25, which will be very accurate because they'll have got they'll have 3/4 of the year. Then in about September, they put out the FBO, which is the final budget outlook. Final budget, I think that's what it stands for. The final budget results in about September, and that's often very similar to the budget's the updated estimate for the year finishing. Now, of course, just scrolling this to the top again, this was put out in the year 24.
Yes.
Right. So this was put out 24 for 24-25. Right. So this is the year that was just about ending for them. So you look just to the left of so that was the year. And you'll note, of course, that year had a surplus, and that was the year they kept talking about. But one of my frustrations is that wasn't the budget year. No. You cheeky fuckers, you're talking about the wrong year.
That's why I asked. That's why I asked, because I remembered them talking about there being a surplus at the last budget. But that's not the actual budget year.
They did it 2 years in a row, and just like my complaint before with the Howard government sneakily switching back off fiscal, no one in the media seemed to notice.
Except Karl Stefanovic, who basically said to Chalmers, how does it feel to deliver your last budget surplus, Treasurer? That was bloody awesome. That was
but that wasn't his last budget surplus. His last budget surplus was the year before.
The year before,
that was last year was the 24-25 budget, and that's in deficit. So it's It was remarkable to the degree to which everybody just shifted the year they spoke about. And I don't think it was a nefarious big plot by a bunker in New York or by Mossad or anything else. I think it's just that they genuinely get befuddled by the quick-talking Treasury bureaucrats who are probably smarter than them and make the journalists feel dumb, and the journalists go along with it. Anyway, I ranted on that before you got online as well. But that's So this is one of the tricks here, the difference between net operating balance and the fiscal balance. And that means the government can announce all of this buying of capital assets. If they say they're buying something that isn't an expense, so they're buying a road, they're buying a tractor, I don't know, by buying whatever it is that they're saying is an asset, right? So it's not an expense, it's an ongoing thing that they're keeping. If it's a non-financial asset here, it shows up in the fiscal balance, but if you're a state government, you just pretend that doesn't exist. So anyway, we're talking about a federal government budget here at the moment. So that accusation doesn't hold here, because to their credit, the federal government doesn't use the net operating balance. To be honest, they don't even use the fiscal balance. They use the cash balance. But they often announce the cash balance and the fiscal balance somewhere near each other, right? So they're quite transparent about the fiscal balance. So they're off the hook here. I'll just run through the rest of these numbers. So the next one is, for those interested, is the balance sheet. And this is the one that'll give you the net debt, if you like. But that's probably still the wrong number to look at. So you start with your assets. You've got your financial assets. And then you've got your non-financial assets. So you'll see here, financial assets is by far the biggest. Non-financial, that's mostly what the land, the equipment, the buildings, the material that they own. Fair enough. Doesn't matter too much. That's their assets. Then their liabilities. These are the ones people often think about, right? So these are the interest-bearing liabilities.
What are the government's investment properties? Do I want to know? Is that a question I really want to scratch beneath the surface of?
I think their investment properties, to the degree that their investments are probably incorporated under financial assets. I think these non-financial assets are mostly going to be the land that they actually hold for non-investment purposes, like the land under the Treasury building, the land under Parliament House, probably the national parks, something like that. So land that they're holding for investment purposes would probably be held through Housing Australia or the Future Fund or something like that.
Right.
And I was going to get into that because that is one of the big befuddling features here. Maybe I'll get into it now. I never know when to interrupt my own monologues to do a different monologue. But
I just saw it and I was like, does it just literally mean what it seems it means, or?
Well, let me just say one point on this balance sheet, the assets and debts. So you've got all the assets you own. So financial assets, actually, I will take this segue now because I've just gone forward as if people are understanding that, and probably the people who are listening are. But you got to, for the people at home, if they were hoping to learn, I can't assume that. So a non-financial asset, you're buying a thing as opposed to an expense. An apple is not a non-financial asset, right? Because you buy the apple, you eat the apple. It's an expense. That the act of buying it and using it are close enough together. Whereas an asset is something you buy it and you can use it over a long period of time. It has ongoing value. You can resell it, right? So its value, an apple, once you buy it, its value basically drops to zero. If you buy a tractor, you could sell it the next year. You buy a tractor for 30,000, you sell it next year for 27,000. So you've had 10% depreciation, but it still has asset value. So that's what an asset is. That's what a non-financial asset. A financial asset is like shares. So I own shares in a business, or people owe me money. You can think of it as like, in this instance, where it's going to be interesting is owning shares, right? So that's a financial asset. So the government owns a bunch of financial assets. There's cash or loans they've given out or shares they own. And they own a bunch of non-financial assets, which is literally the land and literally the buildings. And if they have any tractors, it might go in there. I always use tractors as an example, just leftovers of being an old man. But anyway, so that's the way assets are split up: financial, non-financial, and then liabilities are split up between interest-paying liabilities. That's loans, right? That's what most people think of as loans. This big one here, government securities. You can see that's the big one. And that's a lot of the time when people are talking about what's the government's gross debt, they'll be talking about a number like that, the interest-bearing liabilities as the government's gross debt. But of course, there's another sort of liabilities, and that's money that the government owes that you don't pay interest on. The biggest one being superannuation. And this is one of my bugbears. You may have seen this, right? Some people, if they want to exaggerate the size of the government's debt, talk about gross debt. It's kind of cheeky because the government has a bunch of financial assets, right? So if you have a bunch of debt and a bunch of financial assets, you could just sell off the future fund to pay off some of your debt, right? So that what you want to look at is your net debt. But that's not quite right either, because net debt doesn't factor in non-interest bearing liabilities. It doesn't factor in super. So you can see here, this is not a small expense. What's this? $300 billion that the government owes.
Now, is that $300 billion within that? Does that include what I always see listed as unfunded contingent liabilities, the superannuation obligations that they haven't yet funded? Is that included in that 304
well,
billion?
what do you mean by the unfunded? Because there's an unfunded liability that the government has on people that were under the old pension system for politicians and bureaucrats. No, that's not here, right? So that is an unfunded one. That's not here. But that one's dying off now, right? So they don't use that anymore. I think a few people are on it for legacy reasons, but most people are now onto this new super system. So it is an extra sting in the tail, but it is a sting in the tail that is, at least conceptually, we're on the track towards solving. It's a bit of cold comfort because it's just putting the money in this line, and that 300 billion, as I already made the joke once before, 300 billion here, 300 billion there. So you're talking about real money, but this is not an insignificant amount of money to accidentally forget to include in our net debt statistics.
Yes.
So people who are using gross debt, I think that's gilding the lily, right? That's not the most accurate way to talk about our financial position.
Presumably, that's even more the case because, as you mentioned earlier, the demographics of our aging population and our aging public service, as a result, there'll be a fairly significant portion of this 300 billion at some point coming due, right? Like at the moment, this is a liability that hasn't crystallized because it's something that's owed that people aren't actually drawing down on. But they will.
Actually, probably it's the unfunded super liability that's going to be really kicking in hard in the coming years. And most of the, I guess they'd call it the funded super liability. I don't know. The admitted super liability still has probably a few decades for most people to retire to get off.
Right. Okay.
So the point you were making earlier is probably the one that's going to sting us in the nearer term, because it only ended a couple of decades ago. So I still have that. I have the old school super system from my couple of years in the Treasury.
Elite. You're parasite.
That was the wage. I'll take it. There's not enough to pay it. Anyway, my point here is people sometimes look at gross debt, net debt. Which one's the right one? Neither is the right one. Net financial liabilities. So if you look down the bottom of this chart, you see net debt. A bunch of people will look at net debt. And some people could just go to the previous page and say, let's use this gross debt figure, 940. Let's talk about a big debt number, 940. I was like, no, it's more 550. You're both wrong. It's 815 or 816. Net financial liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically net debt, but now factoring in some of these other payables.
Yes.
Primarily, you want to include superannuation. You're not going to not pay it, so you need to know it. Anyway, that's my argument there. That's a bit of a sidetrack because that's not really hiding things off budget. That's just my bitch and rant about gross and net debt. So I'll go back to how people hide things on and off. This is the cash flow. This is how they get to the cash statement. Just like with the accrual statement, it starts with money coming in. They call it receipts here instead of revenue, but it's still money coming in. And then money going out. They call it payments here instead of expenses. And you look, compare those two things together, and you get this net cash flow from operating activities, which is another potential budget balance you could report. Now, no one reports this one, so we can skip that one quickly. Then what you can do, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, the cash flow from investments in non-financial assets. So just like with the net operating balance to the fiscal balance, you've got from this fake cash balance to the underlying cash balance, cash flows from investment in non-financial assets. So I mentioned before how that for the states could be used to put things off budget. But the next line really tells you something interesting, because those astute watching at home, the difference between the net operating balance and the fiscal balance that we previously talked about, and what we're talking about here, they're only adding in investments in non-financial assets. What about investments in financial assets? Nowhere to be seen, right? So it wasn't in the fiscal budget. Remember, they had the net operating balance, and we adjusted it to get the fiscal balance by adding in investments in non-financial assets. I never said adding in investments in financial assets. All right. And in this situation too, you've got the adding in on the cash flow, adding in investments in non-financial assets. Now, they do tell you how much there is investment in financial assets. Now, of course, some investment in financial assets is just for liquidity purposes. That's this one. But you have to do that, right? So that's fine. No one really cares. No one begrudges anyone. But they explicitly split it up very helpfully. I mean, this is pretty good transparency in one sense. They actually tell you this is the amount of screwing around with money they've done on the financial assets for policy reasons, policy purposes. And that's not captured anywhere in the budget papers, state or federal. So don't worry about this stuff. We'll go back to here. We've got the, this is a version of balance. Again, it's another balance, but no one uses this one, so don't worry about it. And then you've got your underlying cash balance. And then there is an option here, add back in this change in financial assets to get the headline cash balance, but no one reports that. So it is there. It's theoretically there. In one sense, they're quite transparent. I mean, they do let us find this stuff. I didn't find this place. This wasn't leaked. This isn't WikiLeaks. This is off the government's website. So the information is there. But no one uses the headline cash balance, right? They only use the underlying cash balance or the fiscal balance, neither of which includes investments in financial assets, which raises the question of what are we talking about? Investment in financial assets. That sounds like the government buying shares. Maybe you're thinking of the future fund. That's true. That's in that. There's something else in that. The government can, anytime it wants, create a PNFC, public non-financial corporation, or a PFC, a government bank, right? But they don't normally create government banks. They can, let's just say a public corporation. They can at any stage create a government corporation, right? And then they can ask that government corporation to do things for them. This is like a corporatized model. Look, it makes some sense in some situations because those corporations at arm's length from government but owned by government often are run more efficiently than direct government agencies. So that makes some sense. But it means they don't show up when you invest money in them. It doesn't show up in the budget. So an example of this recently, the Albanese government, I can't remember whether it was 15 or 20 billion. I think it was about $20 billion. When they first came in, they said, we're going to put in $20 billion into the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is a fully government-owned operation. They could say, we're spending $20 billion on net zero, $20 billion on renewable energy. And how much did it show up in the budget? Not in the cash budget, not in the fiscal budget, because it was an investment in a financial asset. The financial asset was their equity ownership of a corporation. Right, so when the government creates these public corporations, they are creating something at arm's length from government, but still owned by government. From that time on, anytime they make an equity injection, they just make the assumption that the equity injection is, worth its value, like the share price of the government corporation won't go down. And by making that assumption, it doesn't count as an expense. So that's kind of a neat trick. It doesn't show up in the fiscal balance, doesn't show up in the underlying cash balance. It does show up in the headline cash balance, but no one reports that. So screw it. So,
interesting.
So the clean energy, I've wondered this before, and it's bugged me before, the issue that the government keeps talking about all this billions and billions of spending on climate boondoggles. And then the budget never seems to get any worse. I don't know if anyone else has stumbled into that insight before. How do they manage to afford it all? That's because they are spending the money. They're just taking the money out of our pockets and crowding out other energy sources so that we don't have enough coal and gas and other forms of energy. Put that aside because that's a very good economic argument. But they're hiding most of the spending off budget. Another example, that Housing Australia, where they wanted to build some houses, they just put that money into a public financial corporation. Didn't show up in the budget. It was a $10 billion injection. Didn't hurt the budget at all. Neither the underlying cash balance or the fiscal balance. Didn't hurt it because all they did on their books, they swapped one asset for another asset. They had one asset called cash. They swapped 10 billion of that asset called cash for 10 billion called shares in the future fund. And then they just assumed that that money would be so effectively invested that the real value of that future fund wouldn't go down because of all the Housing Australia. So one of the cheeky things they can do here is they can do this equity injection, assume that it's a good investment, so it has no cost to the budget, and then if they wait for the market to write down the value of that asset, even the write down doesn't show up on the budget. So you've got for people sitting at home wanting to be a Machiavellian genius, waiting for when you get in for how to totally screw up the country or get anything you want done without it showing up in the budget. That there is a workaround. The Albanese government's been using it quite liberally. They did it with the National Reconstruction Fund Corporation, which they created, put $15 billion into, and they can then do what they like in that corporation. None of it shows up in the budget.
Sorry, you mentioned what's the vehicle for the renewable subsidies again you were talking about?
There's the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which existed before the Albanese government, but they just then put in an extra, I think, $19 billion when they first came in. So they significantly ramped that up. And look, the National Reconstruction Fund, a big chunk of that just goes to net zero stuff as well. So that's not a separate story. They also put another $1 billion into the Whyalla Steelworks, and that doesn't show up in the budget because it's an equity investment. They're buying a financial.
I miss the days of no Whyalla wipeout. From
yes, yes. I don't know how he kept going. I mean, halfway through, he must feel
like boring now. Like I feel it's part of getting old to like miss the sort of hilarity and stupidity of elections past. And the other one that I will always love is in 2007 when Amanda Vanstone in the election coverage said, like, in response to the horrific losses of the Howard government, she said, "Well, it's not quite time to open the veins and jump in the bath." Like, that was like one of the funniest bits of election coverage I've ever seen in my life. I was like, wow. Like,
I just wait a second. There we go. Let's do this. If we have to suffer through it, but everyone else has to as well.
Yes, absolutely. This was so bad.
No Whyalla wipeout there on my TV. No Whyalla wipeout there on my TV. No Whyalla wipeout there on my TV. Shocking me right out of my brain. Shocking me right out of my brain. Well, this is the mood.
Oh my God.
No, it was shockingly out of beat too. It was.
I know. It was so bad. It's actually worse than I remember. My mind had like made it less horrific. I remembered it more fondly than it actually was. Oh,
well, I still remember it fondly. I just don't know how he stuck with it. Like halfway through, maybe 10 seconds through, he must have gone like, I've made a mistake. I've made a mistake. Get me out of here. So it's like, I've got to go through with it now. But no, this is a these are the two tricks governments can do to put things off the book. One is these intentional write-offs that I mentioned before, like HECS. So a big handout doesn't show off on the books. This other one is what they call equity investments in financial corporations, potentially equity investments in non-financial corporations, depending on which budget balance you use, non-financial assets. But it doesn't matter because a lot of what the government does now is through these PNFCs, right? Australia Post, if the government decides to put an extra $2 billion into Australia Post, doesn't show up on any budget balance. It's an equity investment in a government business. Right, and they don't show up on the budget balance. So this is a look. It makes there is reason for it, and if the government's used it responsibly, then fine. But you can imagine not every government is 100% responsible all the time. So you've got the NBN equity investments. There's been a big chunk of money just keeps getting thrown into NBN. None of it shows up in the budget. is does every $5 billion investment in the NBN honestly increase the potential resale value of the NBN by $5 billion?
You have to concede that it's not. Like,
well, it's not clear that it's anywhere within cooey of increasing.
Now, okay, here's a good question. Is there any mechanism other than somebody observing it and going, hang on a sec, what the fuck? Like, is there any point at which they actually have to concede that their assumptions were incorrect? Like,
oh no, they write it down. So they can either voluntarily write it down. So if they do a policy amendment like cutting 20% off HEX, then they have to voluntarily write it down. And then it does show up, that write down does show up in the fiscal balance. So you'll see there's in the last budget, there was a big difference in some years between the cash balance and the fiscal balance. The fiscal balance blew out and the cash balance didn't. Wait, what happened there? Well, they were required to include that write down in HEX.
But is that against their original assumption?
But it was a policy change. They just said we're laughing off 20%. But that's if they cause it. But if it's just a change in how efficient it's running, like by a remarkable, miracle or coincidence, a bureaucrat-run business didn't run perfectly efficiently. I would never accuse them of that, of course. But if perchance a government-run business wasn't quite as efficient as they thought, and its market value ended up being a bit lower than what they thought, that write-off happens off budget. Right, that doesn't get included in either the fiscal balance or the underlying cash balance. So that's if they know they're investing in something that's going to be a dud, but they get to get votes out of it, they can invest in it, pretend, say, look, I totally expect it's going to work, and then just accept in the next couple of years it gets written down slowly. And as it's written down, none of the write-downs are in the budget. None of the original spending is in the budget. It all decreases our net worth as a country. It all makes us poorer. It all increases our net debt, but none of it shows up in a way that a journalist would report on.
Huh. That's
I know.
That's legitimately, that's like actually way worse than I thought. Like I might use that tomorrow for 774. That's fucking awesome. Especially because I'm getting asked about energy, so I might talk about clean energy.
Well, a lot of this stuff, because if you hear the government talk about how much they're spending on net zero and people complaining about how much they're spending on net zero, and then go and look in the budget papers for how much they're spending, very hard to find. It's nearly not. Most of it is not in the general government sector. So the government is split up into three sectors: the general government sector, the PNFCs, the public businesses, and the PFCs, government banks, effectively. So that's public non-financial corporation, PNFC, like the government businesses, think of it as, and the PFC, government financial corporations, think like government banks. Like the main one there is like the Future Fund. No, it's not quite a bank in a retail bank sense, but it's kind of like an investment bank. And you've got your Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is like a government bank, which is just handing out money to all of these renewable energy stuff. The only way that's going to end up being a profitable operation is if they ban its competition, which they may well do. But I mean, there's not much transparency. Oh, I think they've got the idea. I mean, they've basically made it impossible to invest in coal, which is going to prop up the value.
I hate, and can I just share this pet hate that I've recently found, is listening to Matt Keane say that Coal's social license is dead. I'm like, well, another way of putting that, Matt, is that you've killed Coal's social license, like, you motherfucker. Like, I really have found a newfound, like, it's like a thing I love to hate. You know what I mean? You know those things where, like, it's like the 5 minutes of hate in 1984, where you actually kind of like know it's going to make you angry and frustrated, but you look forward to that. Like,
Brian and I chatted a bit about this last time. It's quite insidious. They've taken all of these steps to make it nigh on impossible to profitably invest in coal. Once they achieve that outcome, they turn around and say, oh, look, the market doesn't want to invest in coal. It's not up to us. The market decided. You sneaky bastards. That is so disingenuous. And then, of course, a lot of the banks that want to invest in coal, or a lot of the big financial houses, many of which have significant shareholding from industry super funds, which are run by former Labor people. So this is also where I get my bugbear on compulsory super. Compulsory super is compulsorily put the hands of about half of amount of capital control, more than the entire value of the Australian Stock Exchange, are now in the hands of former Labor politicians, former union hacks running super funds. We have nationalized the means of production, and we've done it with a smile without anyone noticing. The Fabians have been very successful. That's part of my rant against compulsory super, which is a bit of a different rant than this one. But today's rant is a rant against the way people are using, especially public financial corporations, to do some government spending off book. So anyway, I don't know if they'll do this election, this election, this budget, same thing. But this is a couple of things to look out for. Write-offs. If they're writing off financial assets, or if they're writing off the value in public non-financial corporations,
Yes, Alex, pet hate.
won't show up on the
Yeah.
books. And yes, if they're funneling more money in towards these public corporations, the thing is that public non-financial corporation, you think, oh, well, that's non-financial spending, right? You remember we looked at before the line saying investment in non-financial assets? Of course, if there's a public non-financial corporation, from the government's perspective, that's a financial asset. That financial asset is called shares in that business. So if the business buys non-financial assets, from the government sector, it's a financial asset and doesn't have to show up in the budget. Anyway, I've repeated that. That was one of my pet peeves that no one ever understood. So some idiot last session asked me to talk about it, and I've made the viewing public at home sit through me ranting about this pet peeve of budgeting.
Terrifying, but very informative. I now hate our government more than I did, and that's a hard bar to raise. So
I'm just checking the chat's coming in. Collapsed Tyrion. I don't know what that was in response. Oh, of course, Tyrant's very happy. We were talking about South Australia, Whyalla. McLeod is just as happy as we are about the joys of the budgeting system. I pet hate Jordan. I think he was correcting your English, not saying his pet hate is Jordan, but I mean, it could be other.
He was giving me the words for my description of the thing I love to hate, the pet hate. Yes, it is accurate. Thanks so much for having me, mate. Thanks for letting me sort of gate crash your stream. I will now.
Well, I'm just about to sign off it now anyway. So
government financial corporations, and I'll be bright-eyed, bushy-tailed in the morning. Tune in to 774 if you guys want to listen to me debate whoever they round up, which is probably the socialists and Fiona Patten. So
what is that? What's happening tomorrow?
Oh, so I got a last-minute message from ABC 774. I think they kind of messaged me so late, going like, "Oh, I know it's late. I understand if you can't make it," but I'm like, "Mate, I'll be there with bells on. I'll be there when you get to work." So it's a Senate candidates forum on ABC 774 with Raph Epstein. Tomorrow.
I don't know what 774 is. I don't watch
it's ABC Radio. Yeah, Victorian ABC Radio. So yeah, so Raph Epstein, who's a very very Victorian, shall we say? He will be putting me through my paces along with some other candidates.
That is glorious, because it is such a wonderful insult, and yet it's coming from a Victorian himself. So it is running for.
It's like I can say this of my own kind. I can say these things. But yes, and you'll be sneak preview. Spoiler alert! I am working on the assumption that this will be the first and last time in the campaign I am allowed live on the ABC. So I will, of course, take the opportunity to say that I will defund them. So get ready for that.
And where can people find information about your campaign launch coming up on the weekend?
Campaign launch. So if you want to go to libertarians.org.au/big_Senate, it's in the events page there. But it's also in my Twitter bio link tree as well. Do you want me to give you the link?
Nick, I'm going to try and put it up now, and you tell me if it's right.
That's the one. That's the one.
So there you go.
The thing that says events in that tab, and you can book your tickets. So no worries. Look forward
That's
to
coming up this Saturday. And I'm going to stop it now anyway. I said this would be a short one, and it's gone over an hour, but I blame Jordan or someone. I blame someone that isn't me. That's the way it works in budget time.
Two of us in a room, mate. There's no way it's going on time. No way known to man.
So if you've enjoyed this, or even if you haven't, you put up with it, and you want to force me to keep doing these things, go along to Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au. You can find out how to join their membership up the top right corner. Give us a couple of dollars a month and we can keep doing this. Or feel free to give us more if you have more. Always happy to take more. But there's a cheap ass version on there, and it would be great to get more people inside the membership list. What I think I'm going to do later this week after the budget comes out is do a little private Zoom session running through a deep dive through the budget for anyone who's a member, and to stay there as long as you like to run through all of the details together. I'll probably then do a summary of the highlights of that for the cheap ass people who don't pay in the coming days afterwards. But there you go. There's a perk. If you want to become a member, that would help us keep the lights on. Otherwise, we do this Monday and Thursday at 8:30 Sydney and Melbourne time. And for the rest of the times, for the rest of the states, you'll have to work it out yourself. You've got a bit of love on this defund the ABC. Let's fucking go, says McLeod. We're allowed to swear here. It's okay.
Very good.
But yeah, Mondays and Thursdays, 8:30. So look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you, Jordan, for joining us.
See you guys.